In this video, we will be looking at educational psychology. Psychology has two branches. One is pure psychology and the other one is applied psychology. Pure psychology is a sum total of all the theoretical framework about psychology which were developed by great psychologists like Sigmund Freud, Carl Gustav Jung, etc. And applied psychology is the application of psychological principles in different areas. For example, if you apply psychology in understanding the consumer taste, it can be called as consumer psychology. When you apply psychology in clinical sciences, it is clinical psychology. When you apply psychology to understand the behavior of people in traffic, it can be called traffic psychology. So psychology can be applied in different areas and they are called applied psychology. In that way, we have educational psychology. Educational psychology is the application of psychological principles to education. And the prime purpose of this is to find solution to the educational problems. And there is an interesting connection between psychology and education. Psychology is defined as the science of behavior. While psychology looks at behavior, education attempts to modify behavior. So both deal with behavior. While psychology studies behavior, education attempts to modify behavior into a better one. When we look at the scope of educational psychology revolves around 5 key factors. And the 5 key factors that educational psychology looks at are the learner, the teacher, the learning experiences, the learning process, and the learning environment. We'll be discussing about it in the coming slides. Contributions and relevance of educational psychology. The first area that education psychology deals with is the learner, because learner is the raw material that education tries to modify, or the behavior of the learner that education tries to modify. So it looks at the interest, attitudes, aptitudes, stages of development, emotional and physical needs, conflicts, desires, mental health, and all that engulfs the learner are dealt with in educational psychology. The second contribution of educational psychology is to cater the individual differences. In a classroom of 50, we can see that all the students are not the same. There are individual differences. Some students are so good, some students are average, some students are poor in studies, some students are highly talented, some students are handicapped, some students have learning disabilities, etc. So all the students in the class cannot be treated in the same way. So educational psychology tells us how to deal with these individual differences. The third point is to understand the developmental characteristics. We have studied about growth and development. Growth is something that can be measured or something that deals with the physicality of a person. But development is actually a comprehensive term which includes growth as well as mental developments. So it is said that development is a process that starts from womb to the tomb. It starts from infancy, goes through the childhood, and gets into maturity at the adolescent stage. At each stage, there are differences of behavioral pattern. A teacher has to understand such behavioral patterns of the child. And educational psychology helps the teacher in understanding all such things. The fourth point is to understand the learning process. Actually, learning process is a very complicated thing. We do not really know how it works, how learning takes place. So, education psychology tells us how to systematically organize your learning process. The fifth point is to understand effective methods of teaching. There are different types of teaching. Lecture method is there, chalk and talk method is there, ICT enabled teaching is there, blended learning, flipped learning, and such types of innovative teaching practices are there. So the teacher has to decide which method of teaching has to be applied to his or her students. The educational psychology helps the teacher in selecting the effective method of teaching. To understand problems of children. We may think that the students are, or the children do not have much problems, but we try to speak to the child. We can understand that the family or the society has made lot of damage upon the student, and student has got lot of problems which he or she has to communicate to somebody else. And if those problems are not taken into account or not taken care of, it will affect the development of that child in the future days or in the coming days. To understand group dynamics and social behavior in classroom. See, some students are extrovert, some students are introvert, some students are shy, some students are highly active. We have to accept that students have differences, but we have to maintain a societal behavior in the classroom. We have to train the students how to emotionally equally participate in the societal activities, the classroom activities, etc. So it is the duty of the teacher to maintain a social behavior in the classroom, and educational psychology helps the teacher in that. To maintain constructive and creative discipline, it is the most problematic thing as far as a teacher is concerned. It is a headache of the teacher to maintain discipline in the class. In order to maintain a creative discipline, educational psychology gives lots of inputs, and the teacher can make use of that. But education psychology primarily advocates self-discipline rather than discipline imposed upon the student. So the teacher has to apply such principles to maintain self-discipline in the classroom. To render guidance services. Students will find difficulty in selecting higher education, a good job, etc. And the teacher can help the students in selecting such things. And for that, the teacher has to understand the taste, the attitude, and the aptitude of the student. And to help these students, education psychology plays a pivotal part. To give guidance for the education of exceptional children. See, there are children in our society who have got such problems, learning disabilities. But we have to cater them to, we have to bring them to the forefront of the society. But the instructional strategies used for the normal children cannot be applied for such exceptional children. So that educational psychology gives us the ways how we can give such education to such students. The 11th point is to enable teachers for curriculum development. Curriculum is actually a comprehensive term which includes syllabus and the other activities that has to take place in an academic year. So to develop a curriculum, the teacher has to have an understanding which activities have to be incorporated into the curriculum. So for that, education psychology helps the teacher. To prepare timetable. Timetable preparation has to be taken very, very seriously because two difficult subjects should not come together. or two easy subjects should not come together. So that when you prepare timetable, a difficult one, an easy one, a skill one, a pleasurable one, such all types of subjects should be clubbed together to make a day a very beautiful one. The 13th point is to help in measuring learning outcomes. The teacher has taught the students have studied it, and now the teacher has to measure the learning outcome. The learning outcome can be measured by different ways, maybe through a viva, maybe through a small chat, maybe through written examination. Even in written examination, we have different types of examination. Multiple choice examination is there, essay writing examination. So education psychology guides us which type of method has to be employed for measuring the learning outcome of the student. The 14th point is to select appropriate co-curricular activities. Co-curricular activities are must in educational process, because co-curricular activities which are totally different from syllabus gives us a chance for the students to develop their artistic talents. But one thing has to be kept in mind, that if a student is not interested in a particular co-curricular activity and the teacher imposes that particular activity upon him, then it will create opposite effect. So that we have to understand what is the creative ability of the student. To prepare textbooks and instructional materials. To prepare a textbook is a very, very creative job, because a text can be a very drab one, uninteresting one, and it can be a very interesting one with pictures inserted, with diagrams, with boxes, with interesting facts. Even when we look at the instructional material, for example, when we take one page printed note, the font size, the font should be an attractive one. So such things will be dealt by educational psychology. And the last one is to know about himself or oneself. See, while we talk about the learning experience and all such things, it is the teacher who imparts knowledge to the student, so that the teacher himself or herself has to understand what he or she is, what is the mental balance, what is the behavioral pattern of the teacher is. So education psychology helps in understanding all such things, which will make the teacher a creative one to impart the knowledge to the students.